It all began on a quiet Tuesday morning in my cabin, nestled high in the Colorado mountains. I had just finished my cup of coffee and was sitting on my deck, enjoying the crisp air and the sight of a red-tailed hawk circling the valley below. It was a peaceful, routine day, one I had been looking forward to since retiring from the Army Corps of Engineers. My days now consisted of solitude, quiet walks, and simple pleasures, but that was about to change in the most unexpected and terrifying way. I hadn't seen Rachel Collins in years, but when she marched up to my property, clipboard in hand, I immediately knew she wasn't here for a friendly visit. She was one of the more prominent members of the HOA, though she always seemed to carry herself like she was in charge of the entire neighborhood. She was sharply dressed, her blonde hair perfectly styled, and her posture was that of someone who believed they owned every inch of the land she walked on. At first, I assumed she was just here to inspect for the usual HOA violations. But then I noticed what she was doing. She was hammering metal stakes into my front yard right in the area where my prized pine trees grew. I approached her and, with a polite but firm tone, told her, "You're on private property. You need to leave." She didn't even flinch, continuing with her task like I wasn't even there. "I'm with the HOA's Environmental Committee," she said, barely looking up. "I'm conducting an environmental assessment." That was the first red flag. Environmental assessment, I repeated. "What exactly are you assessing? And where is the county's authorization for this?" She didn't respond right away, which only fueled my suspicions. As I moved closer, she finally looked up, offering a tight smile. "We have the authority to assess all properties in the water district for environmental compliance," she said, her tone now more authoritative. I could feel my blood pressure rising. I had spent over 2 decades in the Army Corps, a significant portion of that time dedicated to environmental engineering. This wasn't just an HOA matter. This was a blatant case of unauthorized surveying, and I was starting to feel like I was in the middle of something much bigger than I had anticipated. "Where's your official documentation?" I demanded. "You can't just come on private property without permission." She looked at me, a little taken aback, but didn't back down. "I don't need to show you anything," she snapped. "I represent the HOA Environmental Committee. I know I wasn't dealing with your typical HOA busybody anymore." Rachel's calm, almost rehearsed demeanor told me she had more knowledge about environmental compliance than anyone who had just done some research. There was something deeper at play here, but I was determined to find out what. I reached down to pull up one of the stakes, and as I did, I felt something hard and metallic beneath the ground. I froze. The clang of metal against metal didn't sound like a rock or root. No, this was something deliberate. It was the unmistakable sound of a lockbox. When I pulled the last stake near the pine tree, the shovel hit something solid, a heavy, rusted steel box buried 3 feet underground. The engraving on the box was faint, but I could make out the words Water Distribution Survey and Colorado Water Rights Act, 1987. Rachel immediately tensed, her face draining of color. She looked from the box to me, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw fear in her eyes. "What was that sound, Mr. Wright?" she asked, her voice trembling. I had seen a lot in my days in Afghanistan, old forgotten foundations during construction projects, but this was different. It was like I had just stumbled upon a major secret. I spent the next hour carefully digging up the box. When I finally got it to the surface, I realized this was no ordinary container. The box was sealed with military-grade precision, designed to protect whatever was inside from moisture or damage. As I pried open the lock, I found several official documents inside, including detailed maps and water rights deeds. The most alarming part was a deed granting exclusive underground water access valued at a staggering $22 million. Suddenly, it hit me. This wasn't just about a small HOA violation or an environmental assessment. Rachel had come here for something much more specific, and it had to do with the valuable underground water rights beneath my property. My retirement cabin, which I had considered my sanctuary, was now ground zero in what appeared to be a large-scale, illegal operation. After Rachel left, visibly shaken by the discovery, I spent the rest of the morning trying to figure out what was going on. I was no stranger to the intricacies of water rights law, but this was something different. My military background had taught me to trust my instincts, and they were screaming that something was terribly wrong. This wasn't some random act of environmental concern, it was a well-coordinated effort to take something that didn't belong to them. I decided to reach out to my cousins, Jake and Tony. These two were my go-to when things got serious. They ran a motorcycle club, the Mountain Thunder Riders, and they were former combat engineers just like me. Jake was methodical and calm under pressure, while Tony had a knack for tracking down information that didn't want to be found. They were perfect for this kind of situation. "I've found something," I said when Jake picked up the phone. "And it's not just an environmental survey. I need your help." Jake's voice immediately shifted into problem-solving mode. "What kind of something are we talking about, cousin?" "A lockbox," I said. "Water rights documentation from 1987. Rachel Collins and the HOA are behind it. But there's something bigger going on. I think they're trying to steal my water rights." "Stay put," Jake replied. "We're on our way." As I waited for them to arrive, I set up security cameras around my property. At 2 a.m., they captured footage that made my heart race. Rachel wasn't alone. 3 figures dressed in full hazmat suits were taking soil samples and using high-tech equipment to scan my land. They weren't just conducting a routine environmental survey. They were searching for something, and I had a feeling it had to do with the lockbox I'd found. The next day, I checked my phone, only to find it buzzing with notifications. It seemed that Rachel had started a smear campaign. Photos of me, doing mundane things like changing a tire, were being passed around with captions designed to make me look erratic, unstable, and dangerous. They were painting me as a threat to the community. That's when I got the text, "Stop digging or your army buddies will be next." The photo attached was of Jake's motorcycle outside his house. They weren't just after me. They were targeting my family too. They knew who had my back, and they were trying to intimidate me into submission. But they had underestimated my resolve. By the time Jake and Tony arrived, I had gathered enough evidence to know I was dealing with something much more dangerous than I had initially thought. The Collins family, through their company, Collins Environmental Services, had been falsifying environmental reports for years, using the guise of environmental assessments to steal valuable land, specifically properties with water rights. When Jake and Tony rolled in with the rest of the crew, it wasn't just a motorcycle ride, it was a military operation. The group of former combat engineers quickly went into tactical mode, positioning themselves around the property with military precision. The construction workers, who had been working under the fraudulent EPA authority, saw them and immediately understood they were dealing with something far more serious than they had imagined. At that moment, I knew I wasn't alone in this fight. The entire crew of ex-military engineers, who had spent their careers in combat zones and under hostile conditions, were here to help me protect what was rightfully mine. Tom Collins, the head of the operation, wasn't expecting this level of resistance. He tried to call in federal backup, but by then, I had enough evidence to expose the entire fraud. He was left standing on my property, alone and desperate. As the FBI arrived, it became clear that Collins Environmental Services wasn't just operating in a small neighborhood. They had been running a multi-state operation, falsifying contamination reports and forcing property seizures. They had been systematically targeting properties with valuable water rights and using fake environmental emergencies to steal them. The investigation uncovered a staggering pattern of fraud, stretching back over 3 decades. But the real shock came when I found out that the entire operation was built on a series of illegal activities and corrupt relationships, some of which reached the highest levels of government. This wasn't just about water rights, it was about power, greed, and manipulation at a scale I hadn't imagined. The FBI's investigation into Collins Environmental Services grew rapidly. They uncovered evidence of bribery, falsified reports, and a network of fake EP contractors who were part of a massive scheme to steal land across multiple states. They had been targeting military veterans like me because we were more likely to recognize fraud and resist. As the investigation unfolded, the community began to understand the extent of what had happened. Neighbors who had once turned against me now stood by my side, supporting the truth. Betty's efforts to document everything played a pivotal role in bringing the truth to light. The neighbors who had doubted me were now apologizing, offering support, and spreading the word about what had really happened. As the FBI continued their investigation, it became clear that Collins Environmental Services wasn't just targeting me, they had been systematically stealing water rights from other property owners across the region. They had been operating under fraudulent credentials for years, using fake environmental emergencies to force property seizures. The scope of their criminal activities spanned multiple states, with at least 12 other properties in the CROSSHA IRS. In the weeks that followed, the FBI revealed that the Collins family had been orchestrating this fraud for decades. They had maintained detailed records of their operations, from bribing federal officials to falsifying contamination reports. It was a multi-state conspiracy designed to steal valuable properties under the guise of environmental protection. But the story didn't end there. Just when I thought I had uncovered everything, I received a mysterious package, no return address, just a key and coordinates to an undisclosed location. The note read, "The lockbox you found was just the beginning. If you want to know what happened to the other 11 veterans, meet us at these coordinates. Come alone. Trust no one else." This wasn't just about one property anymore. It wasn't even just about water rights. It was about a massive conspiracy that had been unfolding for decades. And it was my job to uncover the rest of the truth. As the investigation grew, I realized that my quiet life as a retiree had become something much more complex and dangerous. What started as an environmental violation had snowballed into an international conspiracy involving stolen water rights, corrupt contractors, and possibly a multi-generational crime syndicate. This was no longer just a battle for my land. It was a fight to expose the truth, and nothing was going to stop me from finding out how deep this went. I was ready for whatever came next.